welcome NFL football fans. It's that time again, time for another edition of NFL Football Talk. I'm your host, Charles E. Smith Jr. This is an Inside Sports production, and we're closing in on Week 9 of the 2015 NFL season. We'll see what's going on. Last week, a lot of good games. We had a couple of quarterbacks combined for 13 touchdown passes. One of the teams then had the game lost by a punter late in the game. But anyways, hey, that's just how the way things go. So we'll see what's going to happen this week. You know I don't do this show alone. I only enlist the best. So here he is from somewhere in an undisclosed location in Southern California. Lives one of the best sports analysts you will ever find anywhere. Many of you follow him on Twitter at Chris L Sports, none other than Chris Lardieri. Chris, what's up, man?
Charles, thank you so much. You can't see this, but I'm blushing. Another terrific intro. I've got the best in the business throwing assists to me, and I just like Blake Griffin. I just lay him in. So I'm sorry to make an NBA reference, but I got to think of a guy who all he does is dunks and layups to compliment your great intro of me.
All right. Yeah, I appreciate it. So, hey, what'd you think? This past week, your Giants, they go in there, the Saints, a great battle, and then in the end, it's all ruined by a kicker who just, it was the short punt, then it was the tackling with a face mask, leaving the Saints right there for a field goal to win the game. That was the only field goal of the game, is the game winner. So that's gotta hurt, man.
Yeah, but being the Giants fan that I am, and after rebounding from the embarrassment of picking the Cowboys the week prior, I did pick the Saints to win for this very reason. Look, I missed the end of the game. Thankfully, my daughter had a softball game, so I don't have to endure this. That said, I watched the highlights, and it was equally painful. You can blame the punter. It makes me long for Steve Weatherford and his anti-Eagle smack-talking on social media. But that said, did Tom Coughlin forget what happened in the Meadowlands? I believe it was 2010, late in the season against the Eagles, when he punted the ball to a certain returner named Deshaun Jackson. Punt the ball out of bounds, Tom. Enough with the mental mistakes this year. I'm tired of hearing about how prepared he is and his team and his 5-minute rule with the clock. I mean, this guy's making a lot of errors this year. I don't say, oh, well, maybe he didn't order it. But you know what? He's the head coach. The Bucs got to stock with him. It falls on him. The defense is atrocious. Thank God JPP's coming back. Yeah. I never thought I'd say that. And on top of it, Charles, I'm noticing a trend. Tuesday was not the trade deadline. Tuesday apparently was the day to throw coaches under the bus. And in Tennessee, they don't fire coaches. They call them the leave of duty. And you know what? I've got to say, Jerry Reese in New York with the Giants, or New Jersey, whatever the case is. I think he works in New Jersey, yeah. And Ryan Grigson in Indianapolis. Their coaches are getting a lot of the heat. Why not those two guys? They assembled these teams, particularly these poor defenses and offensive lines. So I know I'm rambling, but you really got me on a tangent here because that Saints game was atrocious.
Yeah, it was. And then when we talk about the firing of coaches, we have in Indianapolis, Pep Hamilton, who's the offensive coordinator, somehow they put the whole mess with Andrew Luck and all the interceptions on him. And so Chuck Pagano keeps his job for now. But what happens when the Colts predictably lose this week? Then does that mean then you fire Pagano? And if you do that, then now you don't have an offensive coordinator either. And Pep Hamilton was there for the last 2 seasons when Luck was going crazy. So why would they all of a sudden put this on him?
It's the scapegoating effect. It started with Jim Caldwell and his coordinators. It just worked its way down. You'd say what you want about the Colts offense. Ultimately, they don't have the blocking, and Andrew Luck allegedly is playing with broken ribs, according to Jay Glazer. But is that Hamilton's fault? I think not. And, watching the end of that Panthers-Colts game, which is quite an enjoyable game, by the way, for a Monday night, despite John Gruden trying to ruin it for us viewers. If you watch, the Panthers' D-line ran out of gas. And I'm not saying the Colts' offensive line played great one way or the other, but what you notice is Luck had time to throw, and he led his team to a nice comeback and nearly a victory in overtime.
Yeah, he did. We'll see what happens with the Colts. But one thing, we talk about the injury report. So why is it that the NFL is the only sport where you are forced to release an injury report? And I know it's not about gambling. So what they do is they release the injury report because they want to make sure that the other team can scheme for the players that they have available? Is that a fairness issue? Is that what it is? It's not about gambling, is it?
No, not at all, Charles. The NFL has nothing to do with gambling. They have tangential relationships with daily fantasy football leagues that are not gambling. They set the injury report and point spreads move. It's a mere coincidence. It's all about fairness, you see. Kind of like when the power goes off on one sideline because the Patriots did or did not scramble the signal, the other sideline's got to turn their headsets off. It's simply just everything's got to be fair. The teams need to prep for each other. We want fairness in this league. As late great Pete Rozelle said, any given Sunday, anything can happen. So absolutely has nothing to do with gambling. And, I don't think Las Vegas even exists in Roger Goodell's mind, especially when he made the casino stop calling the Super Bowl party Super Bowl party.
Yeah, exactly. And then, another game to talk about, though, which we both thought that it was going to be the end of the line here for Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos, but the Broncos defense comes up tough, and they just smothered the Packers. I think Aaron Rodgers was held to, 77 passing yards? Incredible.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, they really played well. I mean, that D's playing excellent right now, and Peyton's doing just enough to win. But the cynic in me says, I believe it was 65 degrees at game time in Denver. Not to play Weather Channel here or anything, but let's see when it gets a little colder. And then, in addition to that, the AFC, I know the divisions pretty much seem to be locked up instead of aside from the atrocious South. But there's going to be a nice race for home field advantage throughout and the bye between the Broncos, Bengals, and Patriots, and a number of those teams will square off against each other down the stretch. So it'll continue to be interesting. And watch out for your Cincinnati Bengals, Charles.
Oh, yeah. The Bengals are still balling. And then, unfortunately, just like he was injured last year late in the season, but Le'Veon Bell done for the season, torn MCL. So that's going to hurt the Steelers. So now I guess we'll find out what D'Angelo Williams has left in the tank, because this is a good chance for him to do what Chris Johnson is doing in Arizona, resurrect himself a little bit, prove that he's got a little something left. And with the rest of the Steelers team, if Williams can really dig deep for something, the Steelers might still be okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, just to name a few names, I'd rather have D'Angelo Williams as my starting running back as opposed to Melvin Gordon or Andre Williams, or the list goes on. He's a serviceable back. He's a veteran. At least looking on the bright side of it, he played well when Bell was suspended. Right. So there is some hope for the Steelers, but they're going to have an interesting and difficult race to secure a wild card spot with the way things are shaking out.
Yeah, that's true. Well, if winning the Super Bowl was easy, I'm sure the Chargers would have done it by now. And, speaking of the Chargers, the Chargers just, it's almost like this is the season when all the things that should have happened over the past, 5 seasons, finally is all happening at once. It's imploding. It's just caving in. What would you call it this year? An apocalypse?
Pretty much. I guess the football gods really don't want the Chargers staying in San Diego. I mean, I can't describe it any other way. And I know they say, they've had a ton of injuries. Well, what team hasn't? I look at the number of players, including big-name guys that got hurt this week, and you would think it's week 1 or 2 at the rate that guys are dropping like flies. Right. Now, Keenan Allen with the kidney injury, I mean, he should be thankful he's in one piece. Made a phenomenal catch, but his season's over. I don't know if Rivers is going to get to 6,000. He might have no one left to throw to and no one to run the ball to relieve some of the pressure. So, they're really, the wheels have come off there. And on the flip side, look at the Oakland Raiders, Charles.
Yeah, I know the Raiders are going. And then that sets up a good matchup this week, old school, which made me think about Terry Bradshaw and the Snake Ken Stabler and Ted Hendricks and Jack Lambert and Mark Van Egan and Mel Blount, all those guys. Raiders and Steelers. But when you look at the injuries, Steve Smith went down in that same game. Steve Smith Sr., as he calls himself, but down with an Achilles. His career is probably, he said this was going to be his last year. I don't understand why when someone says it's going to be their last year, and then they get basically what is a season-ending injury, they decide to play one more year. why would you want to go through all the rehab and then come out and then try to make next year your last year? If next year was going to be your last year, why didn't you just say you were going to play 2 more years?
I think ultimately guys just want to go out on their own terms and walk off the field to applause. I mean, I think it sounds simplistic, but that's the only thing I can think of. I mean, it's not...
it's just painful watching older players when something like this happens, because I remember when Charles Barkley tore a quad late in his career. You know, basketball reference again, since you started at the beginning of the show. And then they do all this rehab just to try to come back as a shell of their former selves and then retire on their own terms. And sometimes I think, don't you think maybe God retires you sometimes, like he did to Joe Theismann?
Yeah, absolutely. The name that comes to mind with me is Dan Marino, limping around after he ruptured his Achilles. I really think he stuck around too long. I don't get it, but you know what? It's hard to give up. That's your livelihood and the rush you get. And I think, honestly, Steve Smith probably thinks he's got some gas left in the tank, and some say he was reconsidering his retirement. So, shall see, but it's sad to see these guys go out the way they do.
Yeah, and the other thing about Steve Smith, it'd be one thing if we're on a contending team, but the only team that's caved in more, or at least, you know, the same as the Chargers, is really the Ravens. I mean, they're having a horrible year. I mean, the whole San Francisco 49ers thing aside, because that's a whole different ball game, whole different kettle of fish, as they say. But the Ravens, too, just nosediving, Suggs going down early, and then that's another team in disarray.
Yeah, the good news is for the Ravens, though, is they got to play the Chargers this past week, so some temporary positivity down there in Baltimore. That'll always heal your wounds.
All righty, so let's go ahead and we'll get into picking the games of the week here. Now, what do we have before we get into it, though? Mr. Lardieri, anything you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, definitely. I hit on this earlier with the Raiders. I mean, people may want to send me to a psychiatric ward after I make this statement, but I think it's quite a valid possibility. The Oakland Raiders have a legitimate shot to be a wild card team. Now, assuming they don't get injuries, but I say that as a disclosure, as a financial advisor would say, past performance is no guarantee of future success. But I digress. But the way they're playing now, I know Ryan Fitzpatrick went out early, and the great Geno Smith, the jawbreaker, went in, but the Raiders look good, especially on offense. Carr and Cooper. It's funny, since Al Davis is gone and Mark has been more hands-off and let a general manager run the team, they've quietly been able to stockpile some nice young players, and it's starting to pay off. Step number one will be winning in Pittsburgh this weekend, because that's another team they're going to be duking it out with. But a very interesting story. I couldn't even remember the last time the Raiders made the playoffs, but a lot of optimism up in Oakland. And then number two, all the injuries. I know everyone's tired of talking about it, but we got to toot our own horn here, Charles. We said weeks ago, look at the CBA, the reduced practice time, amount of time practicing in pads and hitting, and you're starting to see the so-called experts and the former players talk about how this is an issue, but you would have heard it here first on NFL Football Talk.
Yep, that's true. And then you have the whole thing of the cement track around the field in St. Louis that took down Josh McCown, and this past week took out Reggie Bush for the season. But how does something like that even happen? Really, how do you not see such an obvious safety hazard and not fix it? We can put men on the moon. We can't cover that cement.
Again, getting back to my football gods analogy, maybe that's a sign of the football gods telling the Rams to move to L.A. What do you think? I don't think they'd put concrete in the new stadium here.
Yep, I think so. So, last week, we picked the most intriguing, more of the tougher 5 games of the week every week. So last week I went 2-3. Mr. Lardieri went 4-1. So on the season, I'm sitting at 20-20. And Chris, you got that big healthy lead. You're there at 23-17. Everyone wants to know, what is your secret when it comes to picking these games?
My secret last week was to time the Giants up, Giants down. So there's one right there. The other one, very simple, against the Chargers, especially when they travel east. And the other one's more gut instinct, although I was completely wrong on the Packers and sweating it out against in the Panthers-Colts game. Really, I have no black box, as they say. I have no proven theory. I just kind of look at the games and pick them. And the first 7 weeks of the season, I stunk. And, as they say, to make a daylight savings time analogy, a broken clock is right twice a day, or 3 times a day on daylight savings evening, I guess, right?
There you go. How many times a day on leap year? Never mind. We don't have to go there. Okay, so the 5 matchups, and you're going to feel nostalgic with some of this. The first one, Miami Dolphins in Buffalo to take on the Buffalo Bills. Miami coming off that thrashing they took against the Patriots in their last game. But this just reminds me, I just think Dan Marino and Jim Kelly, even though they're long since retired, I can see Cornelius Bennett on one side. I can see Mark Duper and Mark Clayton, all that, but it's not that way. It's going to be Ryan Tannehill, and I don't know if Tyrod Taylor is going to be playing this week, or E.J. Manuel for the Buffalo Bills, but you can go ahead and pick this one first here, man. What do you think? The Dolphins get back on
I'm going to go with the assumption that either Taylor doesn't play, or if he does, he's still banged up. I know the Dolphins are going to miss Cameron Wake. Big loss there on the defensive side of the ball, but I kind of like the direction they've been taking with Dan Campbell, and I'm going to pick the Dolphins. I really don't know why. I have no formula for this. I'm going with gut instinct and the fact that I think prior to the beat down the Patriots put on them Thursday night, the Dolphins had some better momentum, and I just don't trust the Bills quarterback, whoever it may be.
Yeah, and you know what? I would say, and the one thing they did wrong against, well, they did many things wrong against the Patriots, but I think the main thing is they got behind early, and I think they abandoned the run game so early. All of a sudden, they went back to the formula which didn't work before Campbell took over, which was, okay, let's have Tannehill throw the ball 50 times and see if they win, and they didn't. So they probably learned from that, and also I don't think Buffalo can put up quite as many points, so I'm going to say they get back to basics, and I like the Dolphins to win this game and, kind of keep on the fringes at least of the playoff hunt there in the AFC.
Well, it's about time we agree.
Okay, and then here's another good matchup here. The St. Louis Rams against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota. Rams-Vikings takes me back again the 70s when the Rams were in Los Angeles. Lawrence McCutcheon on one side, Chuck Foreman and his spin move on the other. So I love this matchup, though. We're going to have Todd Gurley, who is a rising star, against Adrian Peterson, the established star. So the Rams playing the Vikings in Minnesota. And, well, both of them are kind of the same team here. But what I like is I trust Teddy Bridgewater more than I trust Nick Foles. Let's say that Gurley and Peterson are going to be equally great. Both are going to rush for over 100 yards. And I like this, but I like the quarterback play on the side of Minnesota better than I do on the Rams, and I think that's going to be the deciding factor in the game. So in a squeaker, which is it's going to be a thriller of a game, but I like Minnesota probably by, I don't know, a field goal or so. What do you think?
You must have read my mind, Charles, because essentially looking at that game, those are the first few things that popped into my mind. Even if Gurley goes off and has another great week, and I think he's going to be the next big star running back in the NFL, especially if he moves to L.A. But I got to agree with you. Bridgewater's had a knack. A game against the Bears, they probably should have lost to lead him to game-tying, game-winning drives. Stephon Diggs has really emerged as a nice receiver. And I think the Minnesota defense can do just enough to potentially contain Gurley. And like you said, I don't trust Nick Foles. So maybe they dare the Rams to run the ball. But I think the Vikings are just playing well. It's another team that's on the cusp of making a wild card run. And who knows, if the Packers falter, they could make a run at the division, and I think they see that factor, and they will play well again this weekend. On top of that, I'm going to go back to an old football reference and think the Rams will have flashbacks to the old Metropolitan Stadium in frigid Minneapolis and seeing Fran Tarkenton and frozen benches, and I think they cringe.
Now, the other thing to remember is the Vikings sitting very quietly at 5-2. So just a game behind the Packers, and I think here's a chance they can actually overtake the Packers in maybe a few weeks. The only thing they have to get caught not looking past this game. So if they get caught looking past, and because they have a matchup with the Packers coming up here real soon, then they may get ambushed by the Rams. But other than that, I think the Vikings should be okay.
Agreed.
All right, let's get to the next one. Old school. Oakland Raiders in Pittsburgh to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. There will be no Ken Stabler. There will be no Terry Bradshaw, no Ted Hendricks, no Mel Blount, no Mean Joe Green. None of those guys, but still a great matchup. And here you got teams kind of fighting for a playoff spot. The Raiders and the Steelers fighting for a playoff spot. Fantastic game here. This should be a good one. What do you think? Oakland Raiders, who are trending upwards, versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And as we mentioned, Big Ben just came back. They lost that game, so Le'Veon Bell is gone. What do you think? Pretty intriguing matchup here.
Yeah, it is, and I took a peek at the weather forecast in Pittsburgh. It's supposed to be sunny and in the 50s, so that shouldn't be a problem for the Raiders. I don't know why I'm going with gut instinct and momentum. I'm going to pick the Raiders here in a really close, tough-fought game. I think, like I mentioned last week, Big Ben is not 100%, and we saw that this past Sunday. I like the way the Raiders' D is playing, and I think even though D'Angelo Williams is a good backup and a good alternative, he's not Le'Veon Bell, and I think they're really going to miss him. And you know what? I just like the way David Carr is playing. I thought a couple years ago when they drafted him, he'd be a good quarterback, but he's exceeded expectations. And good luck trying to stop Amari Cooper. So gonna go against the grain and pick the Raiders in an upset.
All righty, and of course the Giants fan in you was talking about David Carr instead of Derek Carr because he was once your backup there in New York. But here's what I'm going to do. I got to go with, and plus one thing we didn't mention was the ageless wonder of what's Charles Woodson, 39 years old now and leading the NFL in interceptions with 5. So I'm sure Big Ben will give him one chance to pick something off. But I think this game, honestly, it's going to be a little bit much for Carr. Looking at what's at stake, looking at playing in Pittsburgh, all the terrible towels, I'm going to go with the home field advantage really being the difference in the game. And I picked Pittsburgh to win the game and Carr to be a little bit just shaky enough to throw him off. And I got to go with the Steelers here. The power of the terrible towel will be too much for the youngster Derek Carr. You heard it here
There
first,
are no immaculate reception to be had here. And my bad, Charles, David Carr gave us Giants fans so many memorable moments. I think it's excusable that I mixed up the two.
Oh, my goodness. That was dripping with sarcasm. Okay, everybody. Next game, Green Bay Packers. We talked about Aaron Rodgers being held to 77 passing yards. In Carolina to face the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers managed to barely stay undefeated by the skin of their teeth. So there was ugly weather there last week in Carolina, and haven't checked the forecast here, but we don't know if it'll get ugly again. But Aaron Rodgers against Cam Newton on the other side, and this is one I've got to go. I think the Panthers are just gaining momentum. I think the Panthers' defense is better than the Packers' defense. And also Clay Matthews, we don't know how bad that ankle is that he twisted and had heavily taped last week. But the Packers' offense just the last few games hasn't looked quite right, whereas the Panthers appear to be hitting on all 8 cylinders, even though they did run out of gas a little bit at the end of the game. So I'm going to go with Carolina at home to beat the Packers. What do you think?
I'm going to agree with you, and I took a peek, and it's supposed to rain in Charlotte on Sunday, so that doesn't bode well either. The Carolina defense, I know people know about them, but I don't think people realize how good they are.
Yeah.
Luke Kuechly is a phenomenal linebacker that not a lot of people talk about,
Absolutely.
other than when he gets concussions. And Josh Norman's having a terrific season at corner. I mean, he made a game-saving breakup of a pass that could have won the game for the Colts. Those are two guys that I think are going to give Rodgers fits. And then on the flip side, Cam Newton just finds ways to win. He makes plays when he needs to, whether it's a throw or with his feet. He always manages to find Greg Olsen. He managed to hit Ted Ginn in the hands, and he dropped it. I mean, he deposits the ball where and when he needs to. And then one final thing to keep into account, what's happened to Eddie Lacy? Don't like what I see there. And if the Packers can't run the ball as great as Rodgers is, as we saw what the Broncos did, you shut down the pass, you're done.
Yeah. And then the last game we're going to pick here, Philadelphia Eagles in Dallas to play the Cowboys. Could it be possible that Dallas goes down to a 6th straight loss as they anticipate the return of Tony Romo in a few weeks here? but it's going to be Matt Castle trying to get it done, which he couldn't last week. And hey, it looks bad for Dallas, but is this the week possibly that Dallas gets over the hump and gets a win without Tony Romo at quarterback? What do you think?
I don't, and the Seahawks played a really sloppy game and probably should have lost, much like the Giants did. And Matt Castle again snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah.
I have zero confidence in him. If they put Whedon in, I may have an ounce more of confidence, but ultimately the quarterback play is killing the Cowboys, and time is running out. They really need Romo back if they're going to make a run at this division. I think the Eagles coming off a bye, likely, I'm sure Chip Kelly was in the lab figuring things out, and I think after the embarrassing loss they had early in the season at Philly, I think they rebound, get the win, and make the mediocre NFC East race a little more interesting.
Okay, and well, when you're down to saying maybe Brandon Whedon will come in, and remember he's the guy who's lost his last 11 NFL starts. That just tells you how desperate the situation there is in Dallas. And I'm going to go ahead and take the Eagles too. And since you were talking about the NFC East, remember your boy JPP, Jason Pierre-Paul, might be playing this week. From what I understand, full workouts this week, and then it's pretty much a game time decision. Probably he'll have his snaps limited, but he might be on the season with his 8 3/4 fingers, I guess.
Yeah, and ironically, it'll be down in Tampa, but they better keep him away from the fireworks. But I'm sorry, bad joke. But yeah, in all seriousness, the Giants have zero pass rush. This is a huge improvement, whether he's at full strength or not. At least the offensive line will have to account for him.
Yep, and then, of course, the game we did not talk about, but Denver playing Indianapolis, and that's just going to be another loss, and I don't know. We don't even need 3-6 Indianapolis, and then I can just imagine all the turmoil on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday with who are they going to fire next.
Yeah, it's really turning into a just complete mess there, and like I said earlier, not only Grigson, you can blame Mr. Irsay there. Had a lot of editorial commentaries on him, but he's botching this too. So. Who would have thought the Houston Texans are still in contention for first place in the South? Ridiculous.
There you go. All right, everybody. So that's about it. We're about out of time here. Remember, every single week right here, it's NFL Football Talk. Follow Chris Lardieri on Twitter at Chris L Sports. You can follow yours truly on Twitter at The Inside Sports. And so for Chris Lardieri, this is Charles E. Smith Jr., and thank you for watching NFL Football Talk. We'll see you next week.